Hello, I'm Mr. McBrien. This is TEJ20, Turing 8 Project Documentation. So yesterday we talked about arrays, and we talked about some of the applications of arrays and when we'll use those versus accessing files. Today we're going to take a step backwards and talk about effective documentation of software projects. And this is important because you'll need this information to design your documentation for your summative. Okay, so a quick discussion about communication in software development. As many of you are aware, I came from a software background and I have a fair amount of experience with software development, requirements documents, and the like. And I can say that communication is an absolutely critical part of software development. Why? Well, for starters, implementations are typically done by teams, not individuals. And when you have a team of people working on a single product, it's very important that they have an understanding about what given features will do, how they'll work, and how they'll interact. Beyond that, though, really the trend has moved from single companies developing software to companies contracting at least certain parts of the software to other places. So there's a quite large contract software development industry built up, particularly in India, but also there are shops in Russia and other places. Now, similar to this is the communication of software requirements from customers to software vendors in terms of contracts customization. And similar to contract development, it's critical that the feature set be well documented so that there are no nasty surprises after the check's been written. Taking a little bit different view of this kind of thing, it's worth noting that even within a single company, the software development team doesn't typically do market research at all. So the people who define what a product needs to do are the marketing department, and they need to communicate to the development team what the requirements are. And the development team needs to communicate timelines and these kinds of things. And all of this needs to be very, very accurate, and there need to be clear lines of communication back and forth. As soon as there are multiple stakeholders associated with a project, there's potential for misunderstanding, and there's a very important aspect of documentation. By the way, it's worth noting that almost everything that is on this page relates equally to hardware development as well as software development. Okay, so you might say, well, that's well and good, but I'm planning on developing an app, for example, and it's just me that's going to do the work. And it is true that if you're a one-person shop, you will have less requirements for documentation because there's less possibility for misunderstanding. And yet, at the same time, there's still value to that documentation at a certain level, even when it's one person. Why? Well, for starters, because we often forget what our idea looked like by the time we've developed a certain sub-project. We may find ourselves forgetting what we've done. And you may find that far-fetched, but in fact a lot of the code that I wrote when I first developed this unit back in August, I've forgotten precisely what I did, and I'm looking at my code and saying, oh, what did I do there again? Documentation is very important even when it's just you in the development team. And you can also get insights as to your projected development. So when you go to look at your flow chart that you designed for your workflow, you may find that once you put the flow chart down on paper, even in a very rough form, you may find that you have new insights into what you don't know. You may realize that you're not sure about how to implement a given piece of the puzzle until you go to build that flow chart. And similarly, when you're looking at your project document and you're looking at your projected timelines, that can help be a motivator, and it can help you to realize when you need to make compromises and when you need to look for help. And it'll help you to feel very good about yourself when you stroke something off of that to-do list. So all this means that documentation is still important, regardless of the size of the development team. Okay, so let's dive into the documentation for which you'll be responsible for your final project in this unit. First off, you need to have a quick overview. It's a list of the basic features of the software, what it's intended to do. And it's intended, again, to be something very brief. Next, and this is where many teams, even professional teams, fall apart. They don't do a good documentation of who is going to use their product, how they're going to use it, and what they're going to, in the end, look at using it for in terms of a workflow. So a user profile simply talks about who this person is who's going to use the software, how they're going to use it. Good marketing teams will include their education level and things like this so that you can understand what their expectations are. Now, this piece, for purposes of our class, will be, most of you will have, because of the project we're considering for this time, will have a very good idea of what that user will be, and it'll be the same for everyone. So it's just basically who they are, what level of sophistication they have, and a little bit about the application area. Okay, user workflow. So this is closely related to what type of user you have, the user profile. It is not the schematic for the working of the program, so it won't include all of the workflow, won't include all of the pieces of how the software works. Instead, this is the schematic from the point of view of the user. So it's what the user sees. And in many cases, this will involve systems outside of the software itself. So as an example of this kind of thing, you might have some kind of widget that works with, for example, PowerPoint, and the schematic would include all kinds of functions from PowerPoint and operations within PowerPoint, and then the schematic goes back to the software product that you're building as a bolt-on. Okay, implementation timeline, absolutely critical. So there are different ways to implement this. I am recommending that you choose the simplest possible way of implementing it, which is to combine the implementation timeline with some other features. And this is a philosophical aspect that you can try it this way. You may decide in the future to try other ways of approaching a timeline. But an implementation timeline looks at the final delivery date, and it looks at a feature list, and when each one will be implemented. Typical engineering teams will implement the nice-to-have features at the end when they know they have enough to have a fully functional product. And they might lose a few users because the last features they implement they might not get time for. Now, on your implementation timeline, many items won't even have code associated with them. There'll be research of a given feature, or they'll be obtaining a word list, or potentially creating some kind of pictures, or even sometimes taking pictures that will be needed for it. So many of the items in the implementation timeline, the deliverables, won't be code-based deliverables. And what you want to do is have a table to summarize the key implementation milestones. So it's the delivery of given functions, these kinds of things. And make sure you include a column for the planned timescale for each one of those. Now, you may not have given much thought to risk in the past, but I'd encourage you to start to think about this idea of risk level. And this is a common thing in engineering documents, to look at how confident you are that you can implement a given feature, that you can implement a given function, and you establish the risk level up front. Why do you do this? Why do you talk about your risk level? Well, when you're planning an implementation of a product, you want to research and implement your high-risk, high-important features first. If a high-risk feature simply can't be done, so let's take our Turing example, maybe Turing doesn't have a function for something that we really need. We either need to find a workaround or forget about that product altogether. And you want to know that as early as possible. You don't want to have 9/10 of your product implemented and then find out the last 10th that's critical to your workflow simply can't be done, or that it'll take 3 months to implement. So, look at risk factors, how confident you are you can implement them, and attack those first. And I know that's contrary to human nature, but it's critical in an engineering firm for you to do that kind of thing. Okay, a schematic. A different kind of flowchart. This is your second most critical documentation element after that set of milestones. You need to look at your decision points, your calculations, your interactions with outside systems and files, and put those into flowchart form. And this can actually be done fairly quickly, but it helps you to form your thoughts about how your system works. So there are flowchart tools inside PowerPoint. Free ChemSketch has flowchart tools, and there are other tools for building workflow documents. And again, this is the workflow from the point of view of the software. And no serious development of your product should begin until you have that first schematic, so that you understand what your interactions are and how everything fits together. Otherwise, you're at risk of implementing things that you won't eventually need. Okay, when I say your product document is a living document, what I mean is that you really never have a final draft in an engineering firm. Until the end of life of your product, your schematic and timelines keep getting updated, and usually they become, in fact, the first draft of version 2. And to try to pretend that your first project document is the final draft is kind of crazy. In the end, as you develop, you realize that there are problems you didn't anticipate and implementations that you need to add. So in the real world, project documents are still consulted even after production of the product. Okay, summing up. Software project documentation is critically important to the success of development teams. It's a key collaboration device for all stakeholders, and successful developers are constantly looking at these documents and updating as necessary. In TEJ3M, a significant part of your summative mark is going to be for this project documentation, so I encourage you to spend some time thinking about it. All right, your homework. Complete your first overview, your user profile, and your rough implementation schedule, and this will form your submission for your proposal. And that's good news, because it means a good chunk of your documentation is done when your proposal gets approved. Thanks very much. Have a good day.